What's up to all my 40K fanatics out there? Ready to give you guys some food for thought on this Thursday evening. Me and my buddy Zach having a couple discussions and decided, there might be some other people out there feeling the same way we are with Ark of Omens and how everything's going on and all the new changes that we're about to see. If you guys haven't already, please like, share, subscribe to the channel, and turn on that bell for notifications so you can see some of the other videos and battle reports I got coming out. Zach, we were discussing some of this stuff and decided to bring this over and kind of make a podcast. Though, what were some of the topics we were talking about?
Oh, so as a Marine player and just a giant nerd in general, one of my dreams, since I was a young little boy who started playing 40K in third edition, was to put a giant robot on the field next to my favorite Space Marines and just dominate someone, just absolutely dumpster them. And a lot of people have been talking about how Knights with this new Arcs of Omen, no more Armored Contempt, Knights are gonna run rampant. That's what everyone's saying. That's all I'm hearing in my chats and in Facebook. Everyone's saying Knights are gonna do great. S tier, some people have even said. And I was like, DJ, Bradchester, can I bring a Knight? And both of you said no resoundingly. And I didn't think that was fair. So I wanted to debate that a little bit and see where that negative answer is coming from, and see if maybe there is a place, if I can convince you there's a place for Knights in the Marine Army, or if the Imperium is just if alliances are just a trap, just a giant cascade waiting to happen.
Well, you got to kind of break it down in a couple of points. Like when you say allies, there's a couple different ways that we're looking at seeing allies in the near future. You have the ways that Chaos and the Chaos sub faction, demon factions can take allies, and then you have the Imperium, the way that Imperium can take allies.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the Imperium, it branches off into Patrol Super Heavy, which then goes into the Imperial Knight.
Right.
Uh, the Marines got a lot of boosts,
Oh, for
and
sure.
to jump onto that train of I need something bigger, better, and more weapons, I think is just a little too premature. Um, the Imperial Knight is a bulky chunk of your points,
He's
and there are still a lot of armies that can outshoot you.
so I'm
Uh,
I'm actually
Go
bringing
ahead.
a Knight Gatlin. Is what I'm thinking about. The 405, potentially 430 with the giant missile pod on the top. Um, and my thinking is my salamanders are just great all around. The only thing we lack is range. Some people have definitely brought up that Devastators are now super cheap and should definitely be considered to be brought on the field.
Yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of people hunting las cannons.
Yeah, but you once posited to me, a good question that I've sort of list tailored around, and that is, what does my faction give to that unit? I give
Right,
Devastators one reroll to wound. I don't give them a reroll to hit anymore. I only give them one reroll to wound. So,
right. But now with you being able to stay in the Doctrine for the full game, you have access to something that brings another level to your list entirely. While before you were building and you have your salamander traits that you build into, you now have this combat doctrine that you can choose to stay in for the entire game. And that almost in its own right allows you to ally with yourself because now you can take these devastators. And while some of these armies, like Blood Angels, for example, Blood Angels really don't exemplify what Devastators are able to do.
oh,
But because they could stay in this doctrine and use stratagems and general buffs to increase their close combat output, now they're able to take these Devastators, not hurt their general army composition at all, and provide firepower while staying the Devastator doctrine until that one pivotal key moment that they might need to change into something else. A
well,
lot of the units like the Death Company and the Sanguinary Guard are strong inherently just on base stat lines that small characters can give them the buffs they need to push them through.
I mean, sure, but we can only spring from Devastator to Tactical to Assault. I could
And
see
and I
myself.
still think that's fine. I still think that's fine. I still think that you have a lot of plays because you have to remember as well too. We've seen now Marines get the incorporation of sticky objectives,
Oh yeah.
and that really and all the free upgrades and the free war gear. I mean, the money that you're spending, excuse me, the points that you're spending on some of these weapons that you may take are not hurting you in any which way. And by having the sticky objectives is a new level of tactics that to jump already to an Imperial Knight, I think is premature when these new features that we haven't seen Marines have as toys or tools to play with are now being introduced in the game. On top of that, some of the weapons that were really taking Marines' toll, like the Tau Flyer, now that's gone. No Tau player is going to run the Tau Flyer now. It can't activate for until turn 3 at minimal, where it can start bombing anything, and then it can't leave the table to bomb anything. It's not You're not going to see that thing anymore.
Okay. Well, so let me explain my sort of game plan now. You told me the Knight Gallant with a Relic Fist was just utterly devastating, and I kind of looked into it. It's the cheapest knight. It's 4 or 5. Um, with the new points reductions for Arc of Omen, I am quite literally taking my old list plus an extra knight, which is just absolutely insane. Obviously, I'm working on making some changes. I think everyone's already on the hype train about Assault Terminators with Storm Shields and Thunderhammers. And being a Salamander, they only get tougher for me since I'm ignoring AP 1 and reducing 2 to 1.
Which is going to be really important right now,
Yeah.
especially with people starting to tech back into AP1. All those AP1 abilities are going to be very, very nice to have once again.
Yes, in 7th edition, no, sorry, in 8th edition, when I was a newer Salamander player, because I was originally one of the Raven Guard, one of the few, the proud and the elite Raven Guard players, but decided with a new edition, new me, always loved Salamanders, but being off the topic, but people were annoyed, actively annoyed, when I was like, yeah, I just ignore that. And they're like, what's the point of the AP? And I'm like, I don't know. Not for me, that's for sure.
Sounds like AdMech at the beginning of Chikari,
Oh
which
my
we're
god.
kind of back to, and I'm excited to retap into those once I can sit down with a calculator.
For sure, for sure. And one thing that this new edition has inadvertently given my Terminators and me is speed. So typically a teleport Homer isn't worth the points. Now that it's free, I have one free redeploy anywhere on the table at any point in the game. So with sticky objectives, sticky objectives against Marines. So Marine players are going to leave like their back, their off backside objective exposed typically. It's a common mistake in competitive play. It's one I refuse to make. We've talked about it because I've seen way too many demons just suddenly appear on my weak side. I've pushed up everything else, and there's a weak side. I've ignored it. I got rid of my infiltrators over there to redeploy to go do something else, and they just come in and they start wreaking havoc. And I think that's going to be a trap a lot of Marine players are going to fall into,
Well, yeah,
especially.
because especially there is still the off meta play that this is not when you look at some armies and you go, oh well, if this one army does this one thing, it could ruin my day, and sometimes you just ignore that because you go, it's such a small margin, I shouldn't have to concern myself with it and worry about it. But behind enemy lines and engage on all fronts, specifically behind enemy lines, are secondaries that you can see some armies tech into. My orcs, I tech into behind enemy lines because I'm able to put so much pressure on something early. And if you give me your deployment zone and you open that up to me, now I do have now armies that can do that, Tyranids that can pull off the table and deep strike back in, orcs that just have a obscene amount of speed and access to the jump, Grey Knights which can shut and teleport. Now you have these armies that are going to be looking at that and say, okay, well, if I go and play behind enemy lines, here's a great opportunity. And out of all 3 of those armies, all 3 of them can play behind enemy lines. I've considered it a couple of times with my Grey Knights, opting more into engage on all fronts, but I haven't. It's still on my radar as how many points you can score off behind enemy lines based on the units you get back there. And if you give me your deployment zone and you have nothing there that can answer a squad of Terminators and a Dread Knight hiding in your deployment zone, I can sit there, sit in the corner, and score points all game long.
Right, and so I think I know this may be just me, but I think from what I've seen with players see knights and they want to drop them. Like it's instinctive. It's a giant model. It's a lot of wounds. It's scary in theory. I
But if you're
was.
playing on that, if you're playing on the fact that somebody is going, if you're playing on the nature of an inexperienced player
Mhm.
to take on your knight and take your knight out, then when you start getting into the higher tables where people don't necessarily need to, initially, just recently at the Triple CGT when I was playing against Imperial Knights,
Right.
I pushed on center, and the way I had finished my movement was to spread my scarabs out
Mhm.
and prevent that knight from being able to move down center at all. Mind you, you can't really move block them. They can move through units, but
Right.
you can't end your move on an enemy model. So
Right.
if he can't finish his move without standing on me, that's it. So my initial play was to clog the middle so he couldn't move to center.
And,
After my shooting phase
and
and I had done enough damage, then yes, the option presented itself to charge and blow up scarabs and finish off the night. Sorry, Eric. But the opportunity presented itself because the dice went hot and things looked different, and I just had to shift gears at that moment. But
and
initially, my thought was not to kill the knight. My thought was to block the knight and allow these bases to just block themselves up.
And that's exactly what I want. I want you to clog up my knight. I want you to get your whole army into my salamanders 24 to 12-inch kill range. I have one big knight, and you have to play around him. Yes, you don't have to destroy him, but you have to respect him, and your army will move as such. They will move
A, a
towards the knight.
bloodthirster can end him in one
Oh
turn.
my god, Bloodthirsters, an 8 wound cap, and they have what 20? They have, I think it's three totals of 8. So was that 24 wounds? I think they have.
Any attacks that fail to make to the damage step and re-rolls, and then sixes to wound are automatically 8 damage,
Oh,
and then the list goes on what that bloodthirster could be potentially bringing to the table. It just absolutely laid waste to
I don't
the
know.
tables.
I don't think we're going to see
Votan,
as many demon
Votan,
players into that though.
Votan can rip that nut. Rotan can rip that knight apart
Yeah,
within
there's no doubt.
seconds.
Votan. I mean,
Um,
Votan is such a small army though that any losses I inflict on them is actually what it should be to a Space Marines, in my opinion. A high point skill. High point elite army, which Marines are just not this edition apparently.
you have the difference between Votan with that and the Imperial Knight when you're looking at a Hecaton versus Knight
Yeah.
is in the Votan army, if you do not take out that Hecaton when you hit it, there's a good chance you probably won't take it out for the game.
Fair.
That Hecaton, because a Hecaton at one, just here's how I've seen the math break down. Okay, so you drop the Hecaton to one win.
Mm-hmm.
They spend one CP so that it can fight at top bracket.
Right.
Then their Forge Master heals it for flat 4.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's at 5. Then you go into your next turn. Forge Master heals it at 4. Now it's back up to 9. And I don't have its stat line in front of me right now, but I'm pretty sure 9 now takes it out of its bottom bracket, and it doesn't need to spend a command point. Or you spend one more command point, but that thing is it's just nullified your entire turn. And if you can't do more than 4 damage to leave on it, it's just you have to take it out in one swing. You have to take it out in one swing, or be able to get that Forge Master off the field. And those things are going to just fix themselves. And
So
the Hackathon Land Fortresses can end a night like it's nothing.
So if my knight charges a Hecaton Land Fortress, you're saying that it's a 0-win game for my melee-based knight.
I'm not saying it's a 0-win game against it for that knight.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is your knight's not going to be able to take up any obscuring terrain.
Right.
So that Hackathon is going to be able to see you.
Of course.
And for you to charge that Hackathon,
mm-hmm.
they can put it all the way in their back corner and wait for you to come to them.
Right, and as an auxiliary, I don't have like any sort of specialties that knights typically get to try to protect themselves against.
Correct.
Right.
And then with Votan and Sisters as well, and probably Imperial Guard as we see the list come out, they don't have to be very aggressive into you to push you back.
Right. This is sort of like we were talking about this earlier, and this is kind of the era of the. We think it'll end up being the era of the gunline armies.
Well, no. I think the gun lines have time to come because right now, my initial perception is you got to play the game on the objectives.
Right.
And in order to play those games on the objectives, you're going to want units that can charge.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of we're getting away from Necron all objectives secured. I mean, we might see it still as some dynasties, but I think that people are already starting to look away from the custom dynasty and start looking into others. I know I am,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing what they can bring. So, with people moving away from troops and moving into more specialized armies that focus on fast or heavy supports,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to see less objectives secured. So it's going to be about bringing bodies on the points, and you're going to want those bodies to finish on the points and remove your opponents and try to take that objective. Having stratagems and relics and things that can give you objective secured during your command phase is critical and crucial, and I'm looking for those all day in every army.
So, one thing I think players are overlooking right now is that the new how's this, the new what are they called? Objectives, specialty objectives,
Secondaries.
Yes, yes, secondaries. You can get command points off of your infantry for doing specific things with them. Your troops, sorry, not your infantry, your troops.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
I think it's great.
and
I think it's a great layer to the game.
and Sam Dayton, one of the best Space Wolf players in North America, in my opinion. He was pointing
Some
out to
months
me.
he's the only baseball player in North America.
I know he's a lone wolf. He's out there howling at the moon.
He is the lone wolf.
He is the lone wolf. Yeah, and I love him for it. Yes, and it's just a good way for armies that don't have a generation of CP in their back pocket. Because a lot of these armies, like, they just generate CP. Like, you in Necrons, right? You guys have the Silent King. I mean, I guess Space Marines have Gilliman, but he is a Smurf, and I refuse to paint myself blue to get extra command points.
I will say this to all the Ultramarine players: you see these armies in like codexes and stuff. You see Ultramarines in codex,
Yeah.
and you think nothing of it, and you go to build an Ultramarine army, and you're like, I'm not going to paint these guys blue. And then you run into that one guy at a tournament who actually painted an Ultramarines army and painted it blue, and you look at it, and it's like it's almost got like a John Cena effect, like you're seeing the poster child on the field, and they really do look good. Like Ultramarine armies do look nice on the field.
I played at the team tournament that was run down in Toledo. I played a marvelously painted Ultramarines list. The player was relatively new, but the army made the game, like, well painted armies just make the game that much better. It's a way to immerse yourself in it, and it's just so rewarding, so rewarding.
But to kind of top off with the whole ally system, I think Marines are not really looking to do allies right now. I think that they're just inbuilt for their books. I think that they've been given a lot of tools that we need to see time to let it develop. There's a lot of different armies. Deathwatch, I'm very, very curious to see what comes out with Deathwatch. They're a very specialized army, like a lot of losing the army renown things.
For sure.
Specifically that stratagem.
Yes.
But even the whole way just it was set up, but they can still take the Proteus kill teams, and it's interesting. I was just talking with Lane the other day, and he said that he was looking at one of his lists, and he gained like 400 points.
You gained so
with
many
the same
points.
exact list.
Yeah,
it's insane. And Deathwatch is going to be a very, very interesting one to see. Grey Knights. Grey Knights, their secondary game just got extremely good.
You say that,
especially with Teleport Strike.
You say that, but every Grey Knight player I've played, I've beaten. It was close games, but I've beaten them. In this current.
The issue came down to, and I'm not going to say, okay, this is a 50-50 on it.
Mm-hmm.
The issue with what made Grey Knights not as competitive, whether this is fair or not, is the fact that their internal secondaries were difficult to play off of. Teleport Strike only scored 4 points.
Yeah, I saw a lot of Grey Knights player avoid that strat. I mean that secondary. In favor of other things.
It puts you in a position where you have to go at 15. You have to play 4 turns on deep strikes, gates, and shunts. and it burns your command points too fast because now you're spending command points to guarantee gate going off, or
Mhm.
you're spending command points on a shunt move, which is 2 command points there just for that. And then with Arbor of Contempt, you're not reliably getting the kill you need off of those abilities to score the 4 points. Now,
And I won't lie, the shunt ability, every Grey Knight player I've played against has failed it 4 out of 6 times. And I say 6 times because they always at least did one reroll against me. It was just
you're
bad
talking about
dice.
you're talking about the shunt as far as like because the
Or,
shunt is a command point, you just pick them up and move. You're talking about actually doing damage off the shunt.
no, I'm talking about the psychic power, the Gate of Infinity. Sorry, the
Oh,
Gate of
that's Gate of
Infinity.
Infinity. Gate of
Yeah,
Infinity, yeah.
the
And
teleport.
that's and trust me, I feel like there's probably, as you say that, there was 100 Grey Knight players that just cringed at that moment because all of us who have played Grey Knights, all of us who have rolled gates, every time you need gate to go off and you don't have a command point,
Okay.
that's not you fail it. That's not a dice roll you want.
Oh,
You need
it's
that one command point sitting in your back pocket to
mhm.
make sure that you can go 3d6, pick the 2 highest to force that gate to go through
Oh
so
yeah.
that you can get across the field.
It's exactly like Vulcan with his 3-up invul save. Like, players hear 3-up invul save, like, oh, let me dumpster him, let me throw everything at him just to make sure he dies. And then you fail the first wounds, and he just dies because he's not a Primaris, so he doesn't get anything extra to resist. He's not like he's one of the prime. He's not like he's one of the greatest salamanders to ever live, like with deeds on par with Vulcan. No, he's just a basic Marine, so he dies like a basic Marine when
Right.
bad dice roll happen.
You
And
still got the toughness 4.
yeah,
You're still taking the wounds,
uh,
and you're still rolling dice. And the best way to make someone fail saves is make them roll dice. The more dice they roll, they're gonna fail.
oh
Wounds are gonna happen.
yeah, it's gonna happen. And it just I would like to see the actual statistics on it. Like if someone could do that, like if someone
It's probably
compiled,
not as bad as you. It's
yeah,
probably not as bad as you think, but
it's
there's the
just
moments that you
noticeable.
remember it the most,
Yeah,
and that's when it happens. It's those moments when you're like, please don't fail this, please don't do that. I mean, my C, like I noticed it with the C-Tans. It's like, oh, you have a 4-up invulnerable save. Well, 50% of the time I should save it, but I don't. I end up taking those 3 wounds really fast and going, all right, well, I guess you're done shooting at them onto the next target.
for sure. I mean, and one other thing before I concede that I think you have a point on the Knights with Salamanders is that Agrax Agatone, the new primary Salamanders character, reduces all incoming damage by 1 to a minimum of 1. With a 4-up invul, a 2-up base save. Yeah, 2-up base save, I'm pretty sure. And the ability to give +1 to wound with charges. And he's a captain. So with this new addition, I'm hoping to take him now that he feels like a good option with Vulcan for the extra command point to get the 2 captains. Um, and just see how he does behind a line of assaulting Terminators. Because they do have to have their charge move within range of him to get the ability, which kind of sucks. I wish they just had to start their assault within range of him to get the buff. Um, but I think he that wall, that melee wall getting into my opponent is what I was trying to do with my knight. If I had to try to put it into
I think that
words.
I think what you need to do is you need to not look. You play the game out and look at the scoreboard. And I think this is what gets some people, especially with Marines and newer players as well too, when they start to really keep track of the score, start really keeping track of secondaries and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing I always recommend to people when they're just starting off playing 40k and starting to want to play competitive is play with no stratagems, play with no secondaries. Just play, put the army on the table, move it, and do it. And I mean, this I'm talking very, very basic beginning learning the game style thing.
Yeah,
And I
no,
think what happens to a lot of players is when they start to incorporate stratagems and secondaries, the scoreboard starts scaring them. They start looking at the scoreboard and getting worried and falling behind, and they start to play a little aggressive to try and push for points
mm-hmm.
and not play into turns 3, 4, and 5.
Oh, for
And
sure.
I feel like Marines, especially with the sticky objective effect, need to look at how they play into turns 3, 4, and 5. They have a lot of answers to a lot of things. A lot of deep strike control, auspex scans, and things like that that allow them to be able to play deeper into the game.
Mhm.
And look at how Tau wins. Look at how Votan wins. Look at how these armies win when they take control of the board. Keep the game at your pace.
I
Once
want.
you start moving out of cover, once you start moving into the open, that's when you start losing valuable resources. You're not an army that can trade up like Dark Eldar can.
Nope.
Dark Eldar sacrifice a 10-man squad of witches. They don't care. They got another 10-man squad of witches hiding in the back, and another and another.
And they have ways to
They
turn off
don't
my Overwatch too.
right, but they don't care at all. And there's a lot of armies that can do that, can trade up resources. Necrons was one of them in the previous iteration, where you could throw a 3-man squad of scarabs onto an objective, and when someone destroyed it, you went, well, that's only 45 points. I still have 1955 for my army sitting over here, and I scored 27 points on my first turn, or whatever it would have been.
And I can't
So
lie.
I do.
One of the things that I've noticed as I've been coming back into the competitive scene more and more is I only need to think about like at the end of my move. Like I think at the beginning of my turn, here's what I would like to do. And then I focus on my turn, right? Like as a Salamanders player, I don't know about other Salamanders players. My primary objectives are almost always the same, and that's shock tactics. It's going to be Nephilim data, and it's going to be Promethean Creed. Now, Nephilim data is very controversial, I'd say.
Well, it's not going to be controversial anymore because it's not going to exist. Hey, hey.
Yeah. Because the way I played it, I had a Lord of Deceit in my army, so I would put my incursors right on that line to walk into that 6-inch bubble of no go for them, like that they needed to be into. And then deploy the objective. Get the Nephilim data, and then if they die, they die. And they have a haywire mine on them. They're doing up to three mortal wounds to whatever charges or shoots them. Whatever charges not shoots them. Because Marines were like no one's gonna waste like a whole turn of prime turn one shooting on a squad of incursors. And then if I don't get turn one, I pull them back and put them in strategic reserve because that's what you get to do with Lord of Deceit, and then just have them bob in and out of the map, just deploying the Nephilim data. So I didn't have to focus on like banners because shock tactics and banners are kind of counterintuitive. You want to dominate 3 objectives for banners, but you want to lose and then retake objectives for shock tactics.
See, but I think that's the problem that a lot of people look into with banners, and I'm glad you actually said that. Because I've said this to a couple of people, and when you take a second and look at what banners does. Okay, you move onto an objective, you complete an action, you put a banner up there, and you start scoring at the beginning of your command phase, and then you score at the end of your turn, at the end of the game.
Right.
If you just go and turn the game to a hammer and anvil style long ways deployment, or then you have 2 objectives that you can hit and drop a banner.
Mm-hmm.
If you hold those 2 objectives for the entire game, what do you get?
10 points.
Well, no, you get more than that. You also got an 8 on primary for 4 turns in a row.
Right.
So as long as you just hold those 2 objectives, you have a 10 on net secondary and an 8 on primary going through it. Now you look across the field at what your opponent's doing for their secondaries, and you ask them and you see what they're doing, how they score, and you listen to them, and you probably at least 2 of those secondaries you might not be able to do anything with. They might be very uninteractive. Like Necron Purge Vermin or Treasure of Aeons, those are difficult to interact with. But then you look at that one, and now using Necrons again, Ancient Machineries, where they have to get onto an objective, and as they explain it to you, say, oh, okay, I have to complete an action on an objective, but I can't complete it on the same one twice, and I can't complete it in my deployment zone. And that's what you're listening for, because once they say they can't do it in their deployment zone and they can't do it on the same objective twice, you look at those 2 that you're putting banners on and go, I'm going to stop you from getting to these 2 objectives. Well, now if they complete Ancient Machineries twice on the objective markers that you're allowing them to, they score 8 points. Right there at just that, now looking at just that window of the scoreboard, you scored 10 on banners versus their 8 on Ancient Machineries. You win by 2. Now, when you can look at your other secondaries that are much easier for you to maintain and get a 15 point hit on or close to it, you're now matching the Necron player in their secondaries. Now it just comes down to that one game of primary. So now the rest of your entire game is focused on making sure that Necron player never hits a 12 on primary. And then you just keep hitting, hitting, hitting until you can get that moment where you can creep on center, grab the center objective, hold it, maybe you go second and you pick it up at the end, or whichever it may be, or you whittle down the opponent. But now instead of it being this massive game that you're trying to focus on all these different secondaries and all this different stuff, you've funneled your entire game into what turn can you kick them off and get 12 on primary on the center objective. You have 5 turns to do. You have 4 because you can't score it on 1. You have 4 turns to do that in. That's a lot easier of an aspect to break. And there's a lot of other armies that are going to play similar like that. Sisters of Battle, Tau, Imperial Guard. Those are armies that are going to not really be progressive on your side of the field. So you can hold that banners and funnel it into a much smaller game. This allows you to put more things in strategics. They don't get hit on those early turns. This allows you, I feel like anytime I bring reserves in on turn 3, I'm in a good position.
Oh, yeah.
If I have to feel like I have to bring reserves on 2, then I might be struggling on a back foot. So if you can be able to push your reserves all the way to turn 3, and you're just looking to just keep harassing the center, not take the center, because there's a lot of armies out there that can take and hold center for the entire game.
Actually, I have a good analogy for that. I was talking to Brad Chester, and he's a Salamanders player too. But we've come to the agreement that I'm the better Salamanders player because I'm younger, strong. Yeah, I'm younger, stronger, better looking, all that good stuff. But he said, and this kind of really resounded with me because I guess I have a strange way of thinking. Like you and Graham have been telling me the center is you don't want to dominate the center. You don't want to dominate the center, and it never stuck in. And then he phrases it so perfectly for me. And he said, "Think of the center not as an objective to hold, but an objective to clear." Like
that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is, and it's just you have guns and abilities with your guns that other armies don't. And in order for them to take the center, they're going to have to stop their turn on the center. So you're going to keep putting pieces in threat range just to block you from just to block you out. And it's impossible. Well, I mean, it's not impossible, but it's very improbable to be on center and not be shot from another angle. And in order for them to dedicate to try to remove your threat, now they're going to have to move along flanks, which there may not be an objective marker. And if you have your opponent having to, because the shortest distance that they're going to go is going to be that straight line. And a lot of times that straight line is not crossing over an objective. And if it's not crossing over an objective and they're coming at you, well, then you're already winning that game portion. Because now, if that center gets empty, you can move into center. They're not on an objective. The entire game is turned. The entire game is turned where instead of them funneling through the objective and getting shot, they're funneling through no man's land and getting shot. And boom, you just got your 12 on primary. You just got them on a nice little bait and switch.
Yeah, for sure.
Center is a tough place to be.
It is.
Center is a tough place to be, and it's a place that there are armies that are built for it, and there are armies that are not built to take it. Tendency, like with Necrons, I use Scorpex behind walls, kind of guerrilla warfare tactic, and I kept them at 12 inches away from center and behind a rune, and I could jump them out 8 inches and get that charge and be able to charge on center. Chances are I'd lose the Scorpex the next turn, but I would use them to remove someone's valuable resources that couldn't hold up against the Scorpex. And that's usually that way. Now with Grey Knights, I leave center alone. I'm playing off the flanks. I'm playing on the outside. If you want to put your power into the center, that's fine. I'm going to go somewhere else.
For sure. I did have that happen to me at the tournament where I was like, let me take the middle and the 2 side objectives. And it almost cost me a game against Harlequin's player. The only reason I won is because he rolled, like he kept track statistically. He only made he only made 25% of all his 4-up invulnerable saves that game.
That's a bad day.
Yeah, it was a bad day. He was very upset. I was a little worried that I had pissed him off or I'd done something. He had a laptop. So in my head, being the geek I am, I'm just imagining him. He's like writing down everything I'm doing, and he's just analyzing my power level. He's just next level. Like he knows everything. He's like, no, I just have to do work. I was like, oh, and then I kind of took out. But it was a 70 to 68 point game. The only reason I won is because my apothecary rolled a 5 on an advance, ran on a top objective, revived one of my aggressors, who then towed the objective because 2-inch coherency revive, and they flamed off a Harlequin squad because flamers kill Eldar. Very good, very good. It's one of the tastiest and most nutritious meats in the universe. Did you know that? Salamanders feed Eldar cooked Eldar to the Imperium to make sure that they're strong and healthy to help them keep themselves strong.
I mean, if I were to think any army would probably like potentially taste good, I would have to think that orc squig. I think that a squig sandwich would probably taste pretty good.
Too tough.
I think that I mean, squigs. If you look in the lore, the squigs are bred for all different reasons. So I'm sure that the squig's bred for food. Those are probably pretty tasty.
Yeah, but because I killed them,
Squig.
because the Promethean Creed. If I kill a unit in shooting, I get one victory point. If I kill a unit that's been killed has lost a model to flamers or meltas that turn, I get two victory points. So I literally won by my apothecary reviving an aggressor, bringing him onto the objective, and then flaming on. Like that's like if you assume that the middle is yours against any army, you can almost certainly you can throw that game away by one misplay because they have so much more room to maneuver. You may have like a dominating position for shooting and whatnot, but what you don't have is that the ability to maneuver. You give yourself the inability to maneuver, and that can really mess you up. That's just my opinion, though.
I think the squig would taste good just because of the lack of any other options. I mean, looking at other armies, like Dark Eldar, they got those rogue
Too
packs,
much.
but I mean,
I mean,
it's
no,
gonna taste
no.
good.
It's just they're preserved. Okay, they last longer. You can store them. You can jerkify them. Excellent. But regular Eldar best because they're vegetarian. They're prey animals. You put the 11 herbs and spices on them. You feed them to the good children of the Imperium, and suddenly they're big, strong like salamanders.
I mean, my vote's still squig, day in and day out.
Orc
If someone
taste
offered me
buds are
I
not
would
human
eat a
taste
I would
buds.
eat a squig sandwich.
Certainly.
I would eat a squig sandwich.
Yes. Well, you would be in for a very bad stomach ache since orcs are just a different, uncompatible breed.
You find me a squig and you find me a squig and you roast me up a squig and I will eat the squig and we will document if I have to stay out of work for a couple days.
You end up in the hospital, my friend. You end up in the hospital, and the Inquisition will be wondering where you got that squig. um,
And I'm still wondering where we got this squig.
uh,
Anyways,
the power of orcs transcends dimensions, friends. If they want a squig to be here, a squig will be here.
Right.
So there's another thing I want to ask you about because I was worried about this because Necrons have been dominating this whole edition. This whole edition, they have gotten points for free.
No, they've been back and forth. They've been back and forth. They dropped off really hard, and then when the Silent King when everything, if you looked at the Necron Codex when it first came out,
Yeah.
there was a silly little flow chart that was popped up as a meme, and on the flow chart it had everybody that was core for the Space Marines. And it was like 2 columns long, and then it goes over to everyone that's core for Necrons. It was like 5 units. But if you looked at the Necron Codex as a whole, it really and I said this when it was released, they did it in a way that the core role was going to be plug and play, and it was not if, it was when. It was when did they get everything else up to a proper power level to be able to give these other Necron units core, because once those units got core, suddenly we've seen an entire change to the Necron dynamic in their army. And so if that would have been on release, we're looking at a broken army.
I will not lie. I oftentimes forget that you guys actually have to think about what's core, and for me, for the most part,
Not anymore.
everything is just core, for the most part. I
Not,
think there's like a
not
few things.
anymore. The only thing that's like not core that should be is like the Canopy Dew Stalker, but I don't think that would help that thing. Random shots for random damage just feels bad.
Right, but I wanted to talk about their secondaries.
Mm-hmm.
From what you've seen of the changes, and I'm hearing some disturbing noise about warriors being relevant. I don't like the idea of lots of
So
bodies like that.
I think a lot of people are real excited to see a group of a bunch of warriors on the table. And I think initially it's gonna people are gonna play warriors and we're gonna fall back to the same perspective because warriors, although they drop to 11 points, and AP1 is good again, and
Mm-hmm.
that really significantly helps the warrior out entirely. There are still a lot of units in the game with high power level that can remove a 20-man warrior brick in one hit. And with reanimators costing 2 command points and being 85 points, because it's not just the warriors dropping. Because if you look at warriors on a whole, they reanimate on a 5 up still,
Mm-hmm.
and they can reroll once.
Right.
Okay? If you kill 19 warriors, I'm not getting 19 of them back. So if you drop me down to one guy, you're still the squad is still going to be reduced in squad size. And in order to put more guys back in that unit and build that squad back up, well, now you have to invest in a Ghost Arc or a Technomancer or have a Resurrection. And mind you, the Technomancer is probably arguably the best HQ pound for pound, point for point in the Necron army. That's he still can heal other units. D3 warriors back in the unit, okay, that's great. That gives you a couple extra back in there. But now the next turn they get swept off the table. Okay, so you have 60 warriors. Now we're talking about that. Okay, so 220 points a unit times four. So we're looking at 880 points, almost 1,000 points right there, in just basic butcher warriors. It's not taking down vehicles. It's not taking out entire armies. That's good. It's a solid core, but now what are you doing with that other 1,000 points? Are you taking the king? Are you going to take the king so you can get full gold so that you can go start fishing for sixes off a one command point strap to auto wound your hits to be able to handle knights? Now that if you're taking the king, that's another 400 points. So now you're looking at 1,200 plus points on for just 5 units. I think that the Warriors initially are going to be in it's going to require a skill level
Mm-hmm.
because now you are looking at a list that is less about its overall performance and how much damage output it can do, such as like things that like Botan can put on the table. And you're looking at something that is going to be able to play the missions in such a caliber that can just wear your opponent down.
Right.
You lose a 20-man warrior brick early. You still have two or three more to back you up, and then you answer their threats. Now those 20-man warrior bricks are going to be much more sustainable because your opponent doesn't have the resources to eliminate them as fast. And with Ghost Arcs dropping out to 115 points, Ghost Arcs are that's a very pivotal part of what they're going to, if Warriors are going to be able to stay.
Well,
Ghost Arcs can wall all day. That
what
inbuilt
do they bring?
trans. What's that?
What do ghost arcs bring to the table? Yeah.
So, Ghost Arcs, first of all, they have a higher wound count
Mm-hmm.
than Annihilation and but the big thing is that they have that inbuilt transhuman. So when you go and charge this thing into Mortarion,
Right.
Mortarion struggles to bring it down because now he's going to be wounding it on fours. And for one command point, you're looking at a 4 up invuln. So you're looking at a very long model that's thin and can still move through angles, that has fly and can ignore terrain, that can charge and just lock up certain units by just sheer rules. Just it's some of the rules that it has on its data sheet, and then turn around and keep repairing warriors while it's going.
It repairs warriors.
Yeah, you get a it has the repair barge effect, so we can target a unit of warriors and put D3 back in there. Or for a command point, one of your ghost arcs can do D6.
That is absolutely not okay. That is redonkulous.
So if you get a squad low enough, you pop a resurrection orb first, rolling for every guy that just got removed. And that's in your command phase. And then you get whatever your 7-8 warriors back in your squad. And then you do your Technomancer and put D3 back, and that's Rites of Reanimation ability. And then you go to the Ghost Arc, which has the Repair Barge ability. And since they're different names than the Technomancer and the Repair Barge, you can then target the same warrior squad and put D6 back, or vice versa to make sure you don't, if you repair the whole squad, you don't waste. But I mean, honestly, I wouldn't bother myself too much if I spent a command point, rolled a 4, and there was only 3 warriors left to go back in the squad. Awesome, I got the full squad back. I'd be happy with that.
That's a lot of staying power. It's just an absolute lot of staying power.
It is, but again, warriors are toughness 4, 1 wound, with 4 up save. They do have some easy access to be able to gain cover, but at the end of the day, a lot of the shooting armies, Admech, Photon, Tau, can ignore that cover. And those same armies have the firepower to eliminate an entire squad of warriors, 1 per turn.
Mm-hmm.
So where it's going to lie is it's going to be a list that's going to have a skill cap. It's going to have performance. It's going to be able to do what people want it to do, but it's going to take time. If you play against someone who's a higher skill level shooting army, they're probably going to hurt you quickly. You're going to need time to adjust and figure out ways around that. Don't be discouraged. Don't get too offset on it. But it's going to take time to figure out what positions you need to be in, when to use stratagems. Because there's a lot of stratagems that the Necron Warriors can use. And it's real compelling to say, I'm going to spend 5 command points right now and just make this and just shoot for the heavens.
Mm-hmm.
But you want to, maybe pace it a little bit. What do you really need? How much damage do you really need to do out there? Something me and Graham were talking about recently was you don't need to take an entire unit out. You don't need to eliminate whole units. Killing whole units in most circumstances, unless you have a secondary that specifically means you need to kill stuff, isn't relevant to winning the game. If you have a 10-man Marine squad on the table, have an objective, and they're looking at a 20-man squad of warriors, I can spend 5 CP, and I'm being optimistic here. I'm not rolling dice, but just theoretically, for argument's sake.
Right.
I spend the command points, use all these stratagems, and shoot at that Marine squad and wipe them off the table.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe I just spend 1 command point, have a my will be done for a +1 hit. Maybe I'm running the king and I got full reroll, so I just spend the command point for 6's auto wound. And I chuck a bunch of dice. And then at the end of it all, you have 4 Marines left. Okay? Those 4 Marines can move up on my warriors, shoot at my warriors, charge my warriors. I'm fine with all that. Because number 1, anything you shoot and take down, I'm going to get a reanimation trigger. Anything you charge and take down, I'm going to get a reanimation trigger. I could opt to spend a command point and do full rerolls off the king and overwatch you.
Right.
Or I could just fight you in close combat, and with me, I'm running more into a Novak Dynasty. I could spend a command, you charge me, I get +1 AP, I got +1 strength. I'll spend a command point and get +1 attack and have 2 attacks a guy, and shell off the rest of the Marines during your turn. So you don't need to finish. Not always.
That's what she
and
said.
I think, I think that's something that is going to take time to see it on the table to understand when those scenarios are. I can't even tell you when those scenarios are because I haven't played them out, but I can tell you that those are scenarios that are going to take time to see.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we're seeing a lot of people hypothesize They expect things to play. Yeah, heck, we in our locals in the Midwest, we've been seeing a lot of places run old Nephilim secondaries with new Arc of Omens points just to get a feel for what's going on. I personally don't think it's a great idea to mix the editions, but I can definitely see the appeal. I know the shop's doing it.
It, it's
The
it's tough
21st.
on the TOs. It's tough on the TOs. I was talking with Sam Dayton. He's
Mm-hmm.
got his tournament coming up January 21st, and I'm going to be out there recording game one at that tournament. And me and him were talking about it. It's a lot on the TOs because without having, like, yeah, everything's been leaked. It's basically official. If
Mm-hmm.
you really want to go and get the Arc of Omens book, you can pick it up, all the pieces off different websites and everything, and basically have all the information there.
Now you said that
But
there was you said that it was happening where? I didn't quite hear.
it's in Vermilion, the shop game shop in Vermilion, Ohio.
Vermilion, Ohio.
So Vermilion, yeah, I'm gonna be out there for game one of that the 21st, so next Saturday.
Huh. It
But
doesn't.
yeah, but we were talking about it. And it's tough on the TOs right now because we don't there's not as many resources to be able to help validate lists. And I'm not saying anyone's going to directly do this on purpose, but because if you look at stuff like the Tyranids and the AdMech, if I was to go and write up an AdMech list right now, take it to a tournament and play there's a good chance that I might make a mistake because I have to do everything pad and paper, and there's so much, and it's just tough. Like I feel like I would be more on the spectrum that I would probably come in with like an 1850 list because I'd mess up and pay for War Bureau points that I didn't need to. It's really because it's a really tough breakdown, especially because AdMech have had point fluctuations over time. So some things are already costing zero, and it would just be very, very difficult. Tyranids are the same way. It's very difficult that we're waiting for tools. We're waiting for tools to assist us in the army construction process because of how difficult the math is.
Really interesting.
But it's definitely with like the Necrons. So going back on like the Necron secondaries, um, the Treasure of Aeon's got a little reduced. Not a big deal. Just means you can't max it out in 3 turns. Uh, Ancient Machineries plays the same, except now you can't do it with vehicles. I mean, that's that's
Does that change
like
anything? I just remember people doing it with their little bikes. I don't know what they're called.
the bikes are fine. The
Mm-hmm.
bikes are fine. I think I have to. Yeah, the bikes are fine. It's vehicles. It's specifically Ghost Arcs, Annihilation Bars, stuff like that. Can't Catacomb Command Barge can't do that. I mean, realistically, the Catacomb Command Barge has gotten itself pushed back. It's still a good choice, but it's just they hurt that unit got hurt a bit. We're losing core, most everything. But I can't complain. I mean, realistically, it's one of those things that you can't balance that scale. You can't give a Catacomb Command Barge core and say it's fair, and then take core away and say it's unfair. It's like, well, it's not going to be happy either way. I mean, it's one of those units that kind of probably needs a new data sheet, but there's still a lot in the Necron book. The Necron book has a lot of units, a lot of depth. That it's hard to complain and say that, oh, this unit needs a new data sheet. It's like, okay, well, there's other things that we can run right now. Like the the only one that I think really needs a fix is the model, just to be able to give it the fly keyword, just because of how massive it is. It just terrain locks it up all day. And the fact that this thing is literally hovering on a base and it doesn't have fly blows my mind.
It really doesn't have flag. That's just one of the
Nope.
things. Like in every book I've read from Necrons, like annihilate. I mean, those barges and the. I'm sorry, the transport. I can't remember the name.
No, it's like
The night sight though, the other one. It's open topped. You sit on it.
Ghost
And
Arc.
you Ghost Arc. Yeah, the Ghost Arc literally
Yeah,
fly
it's
in
not open
from.
top. Fun fact there, it's not open top.
Well,
Apparently when the Necron warriors jump in, they completely disconnect. We have Bluetooth technology at this day and age that you can charge your phone without putting it on a charger,
mhm.
but a Necron warrior can't jump into a Ghost Arc and still shoot out. Blows my mind.
um, and like they always come in from orbit, like or space, like they're flying in, like skimming over the surface of the water, or like Trajan's just trying to find something crazy, and they're just doing some stuff. Um, yeah, it just it seems like some crazy things just don't get flagged, and maybe it's for game balance reasons. But I just
See, I played Dawn of War. I love Dawn of War. It was a great
I
game.
love
And
it so much, so good.
I feel like one thing that would be really nice for the Monolith is just to give it a once per game ability where it can pick up and redeploy 9 inches away. If it
Like
could do that,
teleporters,
yes.
Terminators, yeah.
If it could do that, at least it could get itself out of bed and get itself out of the corner. But he just gets put in the corner too easily, and you can't not have terrain. Otherwise, shooting armies are going to run rampant. But
Okay.
it's just too big. It's just too big to float around, and it's not even floating.
All right. I mean,
So that one makes me sad.
do you think a good way to balance the Necrons would be to just make them a strong army and bring back the old Necron list, where if 75% of your army, you phase out?
No,
No, you don't want the phase
no,
out rule.
no. First of all, there's enough math in the game. I don't need to know what is it. 75% power levels, 75% points, 75% unit count, model count. That's just more math that we don't need to introduce in the game. I mean, that's part of the reason that Armor Contempt was so it was difficult, I'll say, is because it was just like, all right, so I get +1 AP because I rolled a 6, but I'm -1 AP because of armor contempt. Then you're +1 save, but then I'm 1 damage, so you get +1 to your save there. You're in cover, which was what I meant before, so you got +1 save on that. And next thing you know, you have this algebraic binary code of ones and zeros of what your armor save might be. It was just too much to go through quickly. And I mean, granted, we usually you get into a cadence with it, especially
Oh
being
yeah.
a Marine player and
Mm.
playing armies with armor and contempt. You start to get into a cadence of it where it gets easier. But I mean, for a newer player, that's deterring. Just go and have all that math, and then it can be overwhelming, and you can feel like, well, if there's this rule that has this much math that I'm not fully comprehending, how bad is everything else?
I mean, yeah, I just made a chart. Like I made a little Excel sheet, and then like printed it. Like, do I
But
get a
that's the
save?
thing, and it
Yeah.
makes but that's the thing, it makes it difficult. And then when you talk, when you start trying to introduce and explain to someone fight first, fight last, and charge mechanics onto that, that's another thing that's like a whole different tier to explain to someone. That one's easy to write down. That one's very easy to write down and flowchart it. And usually, anyone who's been confused about that, I have taken a piece of paper and basically you associate 1 point. You get 1 point if you charge, you get 1 point if you have fight first, and you give out -1 point if you have fight last effect.
Right.
And when you do that and you add up those points, it's okay, everyone who has 2 points can attack now. Everyone who has 1 point can attack now. And just doing it quickly like this without the chart, without the models, it's kind of a little blurry.
Like, if it
But
doesn't.
if you start tiering all the units going into that,
Mhm.
the fight first, fight last mechanics start making more sense on how they stack. And then when you select who the fighter is, you can select from this bracket of guys because now this guy has fight last. You can't select them because they fall under zero. They're at -1. And then you can select everybody who's at zero because they didn't charge or not charge, or you start looking into the chargers, et cetera, et cetera. And then the fight first stuff starts making a little more sense with it. But it's almost like for people who played in third edition, it's almost like an initiative
Dude,
in a way.
I miss initiatives because it was just like, yeah, this is when this happens. I don't know. Like people said that initiatives were complicated, and I was like, okay, I have a 4, you have a 3. How is that complicated? I'm a space marine.
I mean,
I'm gonna go first.
it wasn't necessarily that initiatives were complicated. It's initiatives I thought were lazy because you just ended up in too many things. And all the time and time again, Power Fist Thunderhammer,
Oh yeah,
fight
going
last,
last. Oh, I thought
fight last.
I was very happy when Thunderhammers and Power Fist just got to attack when they charged. That was always a
And
grievance of mine. I always thought that if you charged, you should definitely attack first since you are initiating the combat. and then the turn after it should go to initiative because a Space Marine does not lose his superhuman reflexes, after he's charged.
It's like the old school RPG trope of uh, why aren't you attacking? Well, it's not my turn.
Yeah,
But they're standing right in front of you. They're
yeah,
literally pulling. They're dancing for 5 minutes to conjure a magic spell and summon a demon. Why aren't you hitting them with your big sword? Because it's not my turn.
exactly. I mean, I understand
Good
that
job.
it's a game, but there are just some
Right.
things that I'm
There
like,
is some logic we have to throw out the window. When you look at terrain and stuff like that, you go, okay, I have to assume this or assume that. And in some ways, it almost like when you look at a table and you look at terrain, I always envision like a speedball for paintball
mhm.
with the giant inflatable
Oh yeah,
pieces of or so. But when you look at those inflatable bunkers, they're not buildings. They're not a ruined tank. It's a square, a triangle, a circle, and but they represent these things. I mean, if you're into it that way,
I
most people
mean,
are into speedball and paintball are just playing it competitively. But
watching
it's
those guys play is like a mind trick. I'm like, I could, if I was in an actual firefight, I could not hide behind those little balloons. It's like, what are you
oh yeah,
doing?
it's amazing sometimes how many angles you can cut on those things and that. But
And
when
then
you
like,
look at someone,
yeah.
some of the terrain setups, that's what I see is I see that speedball, that same paintball speedball setup, where you have to look at some of these pieces and just go, this is a wall, this is a square, this is that,
Mhm.
and and what they're supposed to represent because of the fact, like you said, it is a game. It is a game, and in some aspects, we have to apply game rules and game logic to it. But if you look into people who do speed running, okay,
Right.
they like all these different speedrunners and that they go into a deeper aspect of the game that kind of breaks it, and you lose a lot of the fun. You may go out of order, out of sequence, and not follow the game's traditional logic. But at the end of it all, you're still within that confines of what the game developer put out there, of what the game developer is trying to accomplish. Just you've taken it and simplified it down to a role of, in some ways, ones and zeros. And it's like it is a game. This is how the guy created the game. You're just diving deeper into it, into that interface of what the game is supposed to what the game represents. A lot of times, like Left 4 Dead.
I haven't played.
If you look at, you haven't played Left 4 Dead?
No, I hate to say it, but I'm a milsim geek. So I like to go play Arma and play like Warhammer, like run around like I'm a space marine or a guardsman and fight demons and
Oh, I
orcs.
loved Space Marine. I loved Space Marine. I
I
turned
can't wait
that
for
game
two.
on to hard difficulty and played that from hard at day one. I didn't care how bad I was getting beat up. It was just really a good game. But
Funny thing, I had a laptop in high school and we could get approved games on it. And I went to the PC teacher and I was like, "Sir, can I have this Space Marine game on my computer?" And he's like, "Why?" And I'm like, "Because it teaches me about courage, honor, and duty, and it just helps me be a better Catholic school student, a Catholic school student." He's like, "Oh, that's such a noble reason, sure." And I got Donald Warren Space Marine installed on my computer.
you just omitted the part where where there's a chaos dude slowly turning into a demon.
I mean, to Catholics, isn't that everyone who's not not Catholic? Not
Hey
to
now,
sorry.
and moving on. But when you look at what I was going to say with like Left 4 Dead and Call of Duty Zombies, those were both a game that came out roughly around the same time, and both of them based around the Call of Duty Zombies was out a little bit more because I know someone's going to call me out on that, but
Mhm.
their popularity functioned around the same time. The difference between the two of the games is in Left 4 Dead, when you fought a zombie mob, it wasn't a single zombie animated. It was a blob of zombies that, as you did more damage to it and reduced the blob's health, the blob would reduce in size. And visually, for the player, you would see less and less zombies because the blob was reduced in size. For Call of Duty zombies, each zombie was its own individual entity that you would shoot down, and then over time, in the survival modes, they would gain more and more health.
Alright.
Now, in the confines, you're still either way, you're still doing a zombie game. And from the surface, as the person playing the game casually, you look at it and you see zombies, zombie dies, and less zombies are there. But now, as being the competitive person, being the speed runner, being whatever it may be that you take that game to the next level, now you're looking in deeper into it, and you may look at that blob and say, how can I manipulate this to be able to get the best results? You look into the Call of Duty zombies. When I used to do a lot of the runs when I would do runs, if you should do a headshot, you do more damage, you kill the zombie. But over time, I learned that the game had a maximum spawn rate. So if I killed the zombie, now I could get zombies spawning behind me that trap me, kill me, and I lose. So instead, you would round them all up. And instead of doing a headshot, which would do more damage, I would shoot at the body to score more points, to have more points, to buy more ammo, buy more weapons. Now, why I'm saying this all with 40K is somebody who comes into this game and just wants to play it because the models look cool, the lore looks cool, and everything like that. Yes, you may sit down with your friends and say, "Oh, this is a piece of terrain that I wanted to do this, I wanted to do that," and your other buddy is going to say, "Well, according to this rule book, it doesn't do that. According to this book, stop it, stop it." Before you play a game, and this is even competitive, casual. I don't care where you are. Just like how D&D does, have a game, have that turn zero, and with that turn zero, you stop and you say what the terrain is, what it represents, how you want it to function, and agree upon it beforehand. And
Sure.
whether it can be casually, you can have all sorts of crazy rules for your terrain and play it casually, and that's fine. As long as you and your opponent agree upon it, you're both going to walk away with a good experience because you agreed upon that beforehand. And if that's how you play every single time, the next time your buddy comes over, he's going to know, and he may bring some units that play into your table and terrain better for you guys to have a better experience.
For
If you go
sure.
to a tournament and you're playing competitively, before you start that game, the first thing you should be talking about, before you even deploy a unit, pick a secondary, is what does the train represent, and then call a judge over for confirmation. You're not being a jerk if you say, "Hey, let's get a judge involved." It makes it go quicker, make it easy, because that judge, that TO, they set up that table and they had something visualized in their mind on how that's supposed to be done and how it's supposed to be used, and
Oh,
that's
for
let
sure.
them do it.
Oh no.
And that's
So
the same correlates over with like the video games and stuff like that. Is if you're sitting down just playing the game casually, and that's fine, and you enjoy it. There's tons of games that I play casually, and there's some games that I want to dive so deep into that game that by the end of it, I'm able to just break the actual mechanics of it. Final Fantasy VIII. Final Fantasy VIII, you left like I have a Final Fantasy VIII speedrun file
hmm
that all my characters I beat the game, and I think my highest level character is level 13.
okay, okay. No, I see what you're putting down. I see what you're putting down. We're getting a little off topic, but I did want to
Yeah, yeah,
say
yeah, yeah.
on the note of off topic, since we're already off topic, um, yeah, don't be afraid to call TOs. Like if you're new and you're somehow discovered this little
Even if you're
podcast
a
we do,
veteran, call the TO.
yeah, because like when we were at the game room in Toledo this last GT, you know this was the first TO where the first tournament where I actually called TOs. I wanted to confirm things, make sure my opponent was comfortable, I'm comfortable. If you're willing to call over a TO on your own ruling because you're not sure, your opponent will feel a lot more comfortable too versus you than if you try to like start. Yeah.
We play a competitive game
Mhm.
that we do not have a referee at every single table, and we
Yeah.
can't. So
Exactly.
the only thing you can do is be your own referee. And at the end of the day, you may need to call in a third person to be the referee onto it.
Okay.
And sometimes, and I'm going to say this for every single TO out there because I've seen players do this, I've seen players act like this, and I don't want to see this happen anymore because I think this is disrespectful to all of us. We're lucky, and very blessed right now. Because as I talk about video games as well in this, and I apologize for off topic, there are a lot of competitive video game communities that are very toxic. And we've been doing a very, very good job as a community in the competitive scene. to be able to create a very minimal toxic environment. At least I feel that it's not that toxic. I feel it's very welcoming.
In the Midwest,
And
I don't know about the other parts of the world.
right. I haven't been over, I haven't seen, but I mean, it feels like it's a very clean environment, and we're doing a good job. I mean, yes, people, the exception does not dictate the rule,
Mm-hmm.
and there are some exceptions, and there are some incidents that you have. But for me, like if somebody messes up a rule, I don't jump to the realm of, oh, they cheated, they were doing enough, or they messed up a rule. So what? Get over it. If that one little blip that they messed up on cost you the game entirely, yeah, then maybe talk to them. But 9 times out of 10, I doubt it really did.
Oh
It
yeah.
was like it may have, but at the same time too, you got to look at that person as well and think, did they do it on purpose, or did they just misread it? Did they just make a mistake? Did they, we are humans, and we do have to self-referee these games. So sometimes mistakes do happen
And
for both
so
players.
I just want to leave a question for the viewer. Maybe those that listen to us all the way through can weigh in on this. But so this was a tough question for me. When I got back into competitive, I had a player who was like, I want to play with intent. I explained my rules, did everything I was supposed to do pregame, made sure he knew all my gotchas and all that. He's like, would you remind me if the case scenario comes up where your gotcha would be relevant? And as a Space Marine player, it's very rare for me to get the chance to use one of my stratagems to be devastatingly effective when I'm not on the attack or on the defensive. But as a Salamanders player, I have it. I have the option to link Overwatch and then heroically intervene. My my opponent, moved his Repentia within um, Born Protector's range, so within 12 inches for the heroic intervention because I rolled 2d6 to heroically intervene, and within range of my flamers. Now, this is on my Leviathan Dreadnought. I know, controversial pick, but I run a Leviathan Dreadnought on my list. Um,
I love the model.
I love it too, and he has literally 2d6 double sixed into a heroic intervention into a Grey Knight chapter master or whatever your master is, and because it's a vehicle, it was a dread knight, and kill it in one turn because it does 6 damage a shot with its claw. Anyways, um, and I told him, okay, you wanted me to remind you this is applicable here, you know, and he's like, oh, thank you. And my friend who was learning the game, he looked over at me. He's like, why'd you do that? You just, this army is like a top tier sisters army. You're in the you're 3-0 right now, and if you lose this one, you're not going to be top bracket. And I looked at him, and it was a tough choice for sure. But when I went home that night, I felt good about myself, and I didn't have any regrets about that day. I played well, had a good game, and it's not going to be I knew I was playing the game as it was supposed to be played. So that's one thing.
I had a moment like that I'll bring up into there. It was nice, and I feel like I did the right thing in the end. It was back in the end of I think it was like mid eighth, and I was at a GT, and it was game four. So it was definitely I was on stride to win the whole thing. So you get to that point, you get to that heated moment. We're game four. I'm undefeated up to this point, and I'm looking solid. So you want to win. I mean, I was I could taste it. I could taste that this was
Yeah.
going to be a GT win,
And it's a delicious
and
taste, absolutely
it was.
delicious. Yeah.
And I felt good. I went and I had an Imperial Knight matchup,
Mhm.
and the guy had a Blood Angel Smash Captain,
Oh god.
and he deep struck the Blood Angel Captain in right behind my destroyers when I was playing AdMech, and I had a 11-man or 10-man destroyer brick.
Mm-hmm.
And he deep strikes in, and he goes, "So I'm gonna put these guys here." And I was like, "Okay." And he's like, "I'm gonna put this guy here." And my response to him, I said, was, "If he goes there, I'm gonna spend one command point, and that entire squad's gonna shoot at him." And he's like, "Oh, really?" I'm like, "Yep, destroyers for one command point. I can shoot with the full squad as Overwatch." And he's like, "Oh, okay." And then I said, "Well, where I come from, you didn't take your hand off the model, which means you haven't finished placing it."
Like chess. Yep.
And from that, and in that point, he was looking down at the table.
Mm-hmm.
He never made eye contact with me, nothing. And he picked it up, and I felt like he was playing dirty because he he accepted that that was a reasoning. So he
Hmm.
picked up the model and he put it over somewhere else safer, still looking down, and then starts moving, and then he stops and says, "Thank you." I was like, "For what?" He's like, "You didn't." He's like, "This is game four. We're playing for this." He's like, "You didn't have to give that to me." And I was like, "Well," I'm like, "It's only fair." I was like, "First of all, I'm like, the fact is, I'm teched into that ability for what it can do,
Excuse me.
not what it has to do."
Right.
And it's a similar thing. It's like you don't always have to use these effects and go, well, I never get to play out of this effect. Yeah, well, does it? You have it there, and you have it there to prevent. Like the reason that my unit could shoot at his Smash Captain was so that units like the Smash Captain couldn't land in my backfield and obliterate me.
Exactly.
I don't have to do it. It's just this is preventing you from doing it. I went. It ended up being a close game. I did go on to win it and win the GT, but it was it was one of those moments where it's like, no, you're not going to do this. And I
It's
do feel bad because my last game, the
mhm.
guy was not used to using a clock,
Oh,
and I recommend people like when you start getting into that, just mess with the clock a little bit, get used to it. Chess clocks are cheap; you can buy them on Amazon.
my first clock experience was actually good. He actually ended up timing out. It was against a Grey Knights player, and when I play Salamanders, I just have Lizard Brain. Like I just know where I want to go, and like you have a whole turn to plan on what you want to do for your moves, and he's doing when you're rolling. You can always be thinking, what can I do? Where do I want to go? And then have that
He
solid game
tripped and
plan.
fell. He tripped and fell over the table.
Oh, never
I
mind.
didn't realize what I was doing because he had to go around the table to
Hmm.
deploy his army, and I wasn't even paying attention to it. I totally like to this day, like honestly, I didn't even notice. I had a lot of single models, like characters and stuff that I was deploying, and because we were doing alternating deployment,
Hmm.
I would put them down one at a time.
Oh yeah.
And I'm looking at my side, I'm looking at the map, I'm looking at what we're supposed to do, and I'm putting a model down, and I'm seeing him sprinting back and forth, and then he trips a table leg, flails over, almost falls into another table, catches himself, and that's when I'm like, oh my god, what am I doing? And then I slow down, and I'm like, okay, I'll let me give him a little bit more time to walk to the other side. And then inherently, he ended up messing up his entire movement phase because of him too focused on the clock. And I felt bad because when and that's one of the things too of not knowing someone else's rules.
Hmm.
Because even afterwards, when he started talking about it, I told him I was like, "But you did do this, but you were able to do this." And then as he explained it more, then I was able to understand the rule he forgot to use, and even my jaw dropped and went, "Oh my gosh, that's huge." But now we're already 2.5 turns deep into the
Game
game,
too big of a
and
game state change. Yeah.
yes, at that level, at that like we were this was a 6 rounder,
Hmm.
and that was round five, and it's like, well, what can I do at this point? You just we're 2.5 games in or 2.5 turns in. We've already lost like an hour of time. I'm sorry we have to play this out. Like it's really unfortunate that that happened that way, but now we're so deep into it that we can't even go back and change that without resetting the whole game.
So
And
he
he
understood.
respectfully he understood. He knew. He's like, dude, he's like that clock, and like
Gets in your
that it
head.
messed with you too much, man.
Yeah. You
And I felt
know,
bad.
at that point, you just like I may have seen a little like a cocky little git. But it's just one of the ways. If I don't, laugh off my mistakes, I will fixate on it and focus on it. And in one way, that's good for improvement. In another way, it's just not healthy for something I love to do as a hobby, something I enjoy to do, to become something that promotes me to, be toxically focused on my mistakes. No, I want to focus on how can have fun. And so, I mean, we got a little off topic. We stayed relatively in the zone of the topic. But the question I want to posit to the listener is integrity in the hobby is important. We all know that. We all agree on that. But at what point do you feel that you've done your duty to help your opponent understand your army and do your job? Is it just telling them the information pregame, or is it
by
going to the
answering
opposite?
by answering every question appropriately.
Hmm.
That
Oh,
is what it comes down to. Your opponent is going to ask you a question. And if that question, if you can tell that your opponent is leaning towards something that may be an active ability that you have,
Hmm.
answer the question appropriately. If somebody says to you, if they're starting to inch towards the fact of they look at it and go, okay, does that unit have fight first? And they don't have fight first, but you fail to tell them that they have a mechanic that makes you fight last. That's where you're being dirty. If an opponent is already in the mindset, in the training, knows where they're going, and they look at you and they say, does that unit have fight first? It is your obligation to say, no, they have fight last. It's your obligation to try as best you can to answer all questions appropriately for your opponent. This is not, you should not be trying to play games around wording and questioning. Games Workshop has done a wonderful job of that for us with codexes, rulebooks, and FAQs.
Can't even find
You
half of
sh-
them.
you should be able to. You should give as much. You should answer the question appropriately, and listen to that person, listen to what they're trying to ask, and understand the fact that yes, it is a game, and you need to. It's your duty, your integrity, to answer the question appropriately. Don't hold punches. This isn't a courtroom. We're not trying to, lawyer our way through it. If you have to rule lawyer your way through a game, is that really a good victory? Does that really make you feel good? You know, you want to know that you won based on the tactics. You want to know that you won because you played the army right and outplayed your opponent in that scenario.
For
And
sure.
even if you lose, it doesn't mean that you're bad. I've had matchups where I've walked onto a table and looked at it, and I've looked at going into the next round of a GT, and I look at four possible lists, and I go, well, if I play this list in this matchup, there's nothing I can do. And then you run into it, and you go, all right, well, I guess I'm stuck. And
Sure.
that's just sometimes how it's going to be. Imperial Knights into six objectives was rough for my Necrons. And when I played against Eric and his Imperial Knights,
And
that
he's
game
top 20, right? He's top 20 Imperial Knight player, if I remember right, right?
I believe so. And I mean, I won 92 to 91.
Oh, I remember that game. He came out. You guys both came out of the store smiling. It seemed like such a good game.
One, 1 point. And I challenged him to the rematch, and I won. I won the rematch. I was like, that's 92 to 91. And that's how that happens sometimes.
For
But
sure.
there's gonna be bad matchups. You're gonna have them, and you gotta look at those bad matchups and try and figure out what you can do to mitigate them. And that's the best you can do. But trying to rule layer your way around it is not gonna be. You're not gonna. It's not gonna give you the win that you want. And that's not the way that I recommend anyone play this game. You can get the reps in, play your army, and learn what you need to learn. But play it as a game. Win graciously, lose graciously. Me personally, when I do lose at this game, and I'll be frank with you, if I lose, I'm down. I'm out. I don't feel good about it. I'm sad.
Hmm.
I'm angry. I'm upset. I don't take it out on my opponent. I don't take it out on the players. I definitely don't bring it home with me. But I look into myself and go, what did I do? What did I do wrong? What could I have done better? How do I play into this?
And
And figure those things out.
for sure. And so it's the question is intended for the audience. Once again, but you hear Tim's thoughts on it, and it's very good thoughts. Well, when do you think you've done your duty as a player to inform your opponent of your army and whatnot? Just leave comments on the podcast, your thoughts and opinions, or maybe even stories. And we'll review them next time we have a podcast. Or at least Tim will. I don't know if he'll be here next time.
I
But he,
accept bribes. I think that if you play me on a table, bribes are a great way to enlist integrity.
oh yeah, definitely. Um, and so I just had one final question. This is a little bit speculative. Everyone's doing it, and this is always fun. Arcs of Omen. What do you think? What's your tier? What's your internal tier list? For me, it just starts
Ooh,
S tier Space Marines and stays S tier Space Marines. I don't care about the rest. I mean, maybe a little Dark Elder because I'm not gonna lie. The new Dark Elder models came out when I was in seventh grade, and little Hesperex was looking real good, real good, and I just had a crush on her ever since. And that is probably the most unhealthy crush I've ever had in my life.
I mean, I don't know. I grew up in a time with Amanda Bynes, but so
Oh my gosh.
I think that it's really hard for me to give a tier list right now without breaking everything down. But I would have to say that I think that guard has a really good shot at being a top tier competitor.
Mm-hmm.
I think that guard is one that's going to really translate well into into Arc of Omens.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Aside from that, it's tough because there's a lot of potential out there that are lists that do look really, really good, and especially might look good in a really local meta.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they pop in against other armies and other things, it might change it up. If we end up seeing a Marine heavy meta, what is that going to be? I guess the best I can do right now is I could give you like looking. I think that the shooting armies in Votan, Guard, and Tau are still going to place very, very high tier. I think Tau are going to switch over from heavy crisis suits. I think we're going to see a lot more of their infantry and a lot of what their infantry can do and how their infantry can play. Um, Guard is going to definitely be a contender.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I don't necessarily think AdMac's going to jump back up to the top of the charts.
I don't know.
I think that
When I played an Advent player, I played their game and they dumpster me. They have the capability to dominate the battlefield. They have a lot of options, a lot of tools. They're
like you
nowhere
said,
near.
you said it perfectly there. They have the capability of it, but there's still an army that can end up base. There's still an army that first dice roll for who goes first could be the difference between the win or loss. There's still too much of a matchup that you roll the dice and you went first, good game. You went second, oh, I lost. And so I still think that's going to be a tough point that AdMec's going to sit at. I think that a lot of initially we're going to see a lot of close combat armies that are going to run the top of the chart. Uh, uh, Being able to play on objectives is just that's where the game is. If you're on objectives, you're probably scoring points. If you score points, you win the game.
Mm-hmm.
So I think initially we're going to see a lot of close combat armies jump to the top of the charts, and then the people who are playing Imperial Guard, Tau, and maybe AdMec's got the guns, but those gun build armies, Votan as well, they're going to start to figure out how to mitigate this, how to score those points, and how to play their turns 3, 4, and 5 in a better fashion. And it also, I like playing defensive builds because it means that I don't have to know every book in the game.
Yeah.
And I can usually sacrifice first turn to watch what my opponent's doing
Mm-hmm.
and play later off the game.
Yeah.
And I think that style will also help these shooting armies pick up pace.
And I won't lie. Ever since I became an adult, I have no time to read all the codexes. I used to read every codex, every edition. I read I read seventh through fifth editions, rulebooks back and front, inside and out. I can tell you that you get rerolls to hit on if you had a blitz skill of 6 or higher, and you just redid the chart. There's all those little rules that gave you a little bit of advantage. But just the average competitive player, they only have enough time between GTS, in my opinion, to truly max out one army for that tournament. And you're not going to be able to learn every army. I mean, not all of us
No,
can be like Brett Chester and just understand everything at a glance.
well, not even just him. I mean, there's a lot of guys that are able to get in the reps, like all the Art of War guys, tabletop types. Those guys are able to get in a lot of reps and able to really cycle through a lot of them. needs to know those. Where someone such as myself,
Mhm.
father of three, full-time employee, etc., those are the ones that I may listen to hear what some of these armies can do,
Mhm.
because I don't have access to all those books or have the time to. There's a lot of resources out on the internet
For
and a
sure.
lot of read on. And at the same time, too, the streamlining of roles has helped a lot. We use the word transhuman interchangeably
Oh,
with
for sure.
a lot of rules in the game. I mean, if you really read the rule is any to wound roll of one through three is ignored,
Yeah.
or something like that in the wordings. I'm sorry if I butchered it, but we know it as transhuman because the first thing that we were introduced to was Space Marine Stratagem, Transhuman Physiology. And so whenever we talk about it with a Ghost Arc or something else, it just turns into, oh, they have transhuman. And that's just something that's been fluent throughout it. Deep Strike. Deep Strike is something that it has been around for a while because of previous editions where the rule was Deep Strike, units being placed in Deep Strike. And now, if you look through the codexes, there's not a single reference to Deep Strike in any of these. That feel no pain. There's not a reference to a word of feel no pain. I mean, there might be. Someone could probably correct me out. There's probably a unit out there that might have an ability that it says feel no pain, but typically it's they roll a dice and on a 5 up the wound is ignored. But we say 5 up feel no pain. I mean, just the other day when I was talking to Jose about Grey Knights, I said, "Oh, this unit has a 5 up feel no pain." Oh, and those are just things that have uh, helped to line the game up where it's like, certain armies have the same abilities, but it's a matter of how easily they can access those abilities versus some other armies that might have to spend more resources to get a reroll or a transhuman or a redeploy. Redeploy is actually the best one, and I'll stop this note on this one. Redeploy. Necrons. You have to spend a 300. I mean, you can do the free 6-inch move, but the true redeploy, where the ability that we see streamlined across armies, where you can pick a unit up and put it in reserve, or pick a unit up and replace it before the first battle round after knowing who goes first. For Necrons, you have to spend 300 points on the Deceiver. For Grey Knights, I spend 15, 20 points on a little piece of war gear that's point purchasable, not a relic, that you put on a character, and now you can do the same thing. Or you go into Space Marines and you can spend one command point. So that's an ability that's streamlined across many, many armies. But an army like Necrons has to spend so many more resources to get it versus an army like Space Marines, which can spend a command point and do the same thing as long as they're Phobos.
Mhm. Well,
You know,
I just do it. I just spend a command point with my war with an additional warlord trait to give it to my Batman lieutenant. For those of you who don't know,
but
I have Batman in my army, so none of you can beat me.
but needless to say, you get the point that bring up is you don't. These abilities are all over the place. Just some armies have easier access into them than others.
For sure. No, definitely. Like, there's a lot of armies. Well, like, do you have redeploys? Like, nope. Like, I have never heard of knights having redeploy. So that's one army that I don't think even has access to it.
Advance and charge. Dark Eldar looks at advance and charge and says, "Wait, I can't charge after that. No, my army just advances and charges." Grey Knights look at that and go, "Wait, that's a thing. I can do that." Well, sure, you can do it with a warlord trade, this, that, and the other, and it's one guy and it's one character. So there's ways to get to it, but some armies have more difficult time getting to it, and that
You mean
plays into
salamanders?
who they are or what they are.
You mean the slowest army? Like, at least as far as this is the slowest I've ever been in any edition. Because like I said before, I was Raven Guard, so my peak years of Raven Guard were seventh edition, double Skyhammer. I null deployed deep struck, I always chose to go second night fighting versus because Tau was just so dominant in seventh edition. I made it night
Huh.
fighting with Raven Guard, became shrouded, and because Tau didn't ignore night fighting unless you bought the Black Sun filters. So unless your opponent was paying the extra points with the Black Sun filters, you actually got cover saves versus their ridiculously high AP. And you could charge out of deep strike. And back then, you had the deep strike dice. So I would just put myself 6 inches in front of my opponent because I had two dice. It's typically average roll of seven. Um, I was a little ballsy. And then just did my thing. So this edition has been a real. These two last two editions for me, because I've always loved Salamanders, like even as a kid. It was just never feasible for me to get like the models until I got older. Raven Guard were easy because people just throw away throwing away Assault Marines for like $25 on Amazon and eBay.
Hmm.
And drop pods have always been relatively cheap, and Devastators. And I only needed 4 boxes of Devastator to get that. And a lot of the models were just people just gave me them because they didn't care. Um, but it's a tough thing. It's
Well, my Grey Knights, what the funny thing, the plus minus of my Grey Knights was also when my 40K career, I was young and I made some stupid financial decisions, so I've bought and sold a couple of armies. But when I finally started to learn how to adult, the army that I was playing was Grey Knights, and I kind of had to make a choice. It was continue collecting video games and all that stuff, or keep playing 40K. And I stuck with Warhammer. And when I did that, I took my Grey Knights that I wanted to build because I've always loved the Grey Knights. But the
mm,
problem was in third edition, you had one option for Grey Knights, which was a chapter approved White Dwarf entry. And then later on, you got a codex, which had the Land Raider, Terminators, and Strike. And
the
like,
Demon Hunter Codex.
hardly. What's that?
The Demon Hunter Codex.
Yes.
Oh god, that
And
was such
the
a
and
that
you
was such a
had the
terrible
access
codex.
to the Inquisition at the time.
Yeah, you could take the Inquisition and then the Stormtroopers. Yeah,
Correct. Yeah. Those were nasty. But you didn't. There wasn't that much to play off of.
sure.
And then we started getting the actual Grey Knight books, and it felt like, oh hey, look, there's an actual army here, and I've always loved them. I love the fact that they're the army that's supposed to be, they're the demon hunters. They are the quote unquote ultimate good guys. They're not. Granted, some of the stuff they may do may be borderline evil. I mean, if
Oh,
you had the Demon Hunters
borderline,
Codex,
borderline. They wanted to wipe out a whole planet because demons got dispelled on their planet. The Space Wolves had to
no,
backhand them
no,
to stop them.
they're given directions to, and they follow the directions because they believe that they're correct.
Well, yeah, no. See, that sounds pretty evil to me. All it takes is for good men not to do anything for evil to win. You think the
Listen, you can
salamanders are
try
good at
and
that?
you can try and besmudge my Grey Knights all
I'm
you
not
want. They're good
disfudging them.
people,
I'm
okay?
telling you
Listen,
that they are
they
not.
hold the door. They help their neighbor take the trash
No, they
into the
don't.
curb.
They kick
They're
their
good
neighbor
people.
to the curb because they are trash.
But but now what my Grey Knights was a very poor army,
Yeah.
and I had access to a bunch of Space Marines, and I spent hours scrubbing paint off of them, and I bought a kit of Strike Squad and
Mhm.
did a weapon swap. And initially, what was, oh, look, I'm just a poor guy trying to build an army, in the end turned out to be a artistic aesthetic because now when I go and play my army in a tournament, I say, okay, well, all my strike are actually Space Marine models. All my interceptors are Sanguinary Guard models. All of my purifiers are actual Grey Knight Strike. And when I say my Sanguinary Guard or my interceptors are Sanguinary Guard, I mean that I've used the Sanguinary Guard model, swapped it over to the proper Grey Knight weapon, so he's got a real halberd, and I swap his backpack over to an interceptor backpack. So anyone walking by the table sees an interceptor, but then when you stop and look down at it, you actually see that the model has more depth to it because it's different than everything else. It's not that just singular kit, and it gave me a nice little aesthetic moving forward. Unfortunately, I kind of don't really have a way around that with Paladins and Terminators, but man, I love that Terminator model, so I'm okay with it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough.
I just wish the Dread Knight had more posability. He just kind of stoic. I mean, my Grandmaster, it was an easy conversion to do, but I don't feel like he should be that much of a conversion. But you know, I can't complain. I can't complain that much. The biggest complaint I have is the Grey Knight book. It's just there's not that much to it. You got a couple of units. I'd like to see some more, but I don't want to bloat it too much. Maybe a psychic vehicle would be cool.
For sure. For
Something
sure. Something like that to
like a psychic tank.
yeah, like a psychic tank. I mean, I think
Yeah.
there is a psychic knight. I mean, a psychic warhound of some sort.
Well, I mean, the dreadnoughts are psychers, the dread knights are vehicles, and they're psychers. But yeah, like a tank. Some, just something to give us new. I mean, heck, we don't even have a, a sprue for a grandmaster or a brother captain. For those, just the other day, someone was talking to me about building a Grey Knight army, but he said he was new to Grey Knights, and he's like, "Hey, any recommendations?" I said, "Yeah, buy a box of Terminators because there's 5 characters for you." And he laughed and said, "Really?" I'm like, "Well, first of all, you got the banner in there, so that's one character. You have the apothecary in there, so that's another character. And then you take the other three and you make yourself a librarian, a grandmaster, and the last one, dealer's choice. But that's your characters right there. That's all of your basic foot characters if you want to run them that come out of that box instead of having a separate sprue. I mean, granted, you can go and get a Terminator librarian and make him a Grey Knight librarian, and I recommend that. But other than that, you got Drago, Crow, and that's it. Oh,
Okay.
Tigurus. I'm not sorry, not Tigurus. Oh, what's his name? Oh man, I can't remember his name. And at Voldus, that's it. Grandmaster Voldus. But that's it. And you know, I know for me personally, I don't really want to use a named character model to represent a non-named character model. And Voldus doesn't come with a head swap. He doesn't have like a helmeted version. It's just him as is.
I think that's all the time we have for tonight. It's getting late, and I think we've addressed the three topics we want to talk about, right? Is there anything you want to say
Yep.
to anyone that's made it this far?
I just remind everybody, please, if you made it this far, please subscribe to the channel so you can see some of the notification. I'm looking to do more stuff like this in the future. Zach has been extremely helpful in coaching me and showing me some of the ways of like what I can do on the internet, what I'm capable of. And as I've said in some of my videos, I'm your regular gamer, regular guy, and this has been an addiction that I've loved with Warhammer and love talking about it and love continuing talking about it with anyone and everyone who will listen. So this is not just this is more than just the trying to build the channel aspect of it. This is trying to feed that addiction and help everyone else to have that same thing to you go to work and you have a shift of just monotony and you want something to burn through the day and want something to just kick that other muscle that thinks about 40K. That's who I was. Sitting there working at a pizza shop and I would put on a podcast, put on a battle report and just listen to some people ramble about Warhammer and stop and think. And next thing you know, I look up and it's 4 o'clock and I'm getting ready to call it a day. And that was what inspired me to even want to start building this channel and build this up. And the more people that I can get that are listening and enjoying this content and subscribe allows me to get to a point where I can bring this more frequently and be a part of this more. And definitely, Zach, appreciate the time that you've taken to show me some of this stuff with the ease of some of this stuff that just seems very overwhelming at first with the internet and everything else.
Sure, it's my pleasure. All right. Thank you for listening, and hopefully we'll see you next week. If there's any quality problems or whatnot, just bear with it for tonight, and I'll take a listen and try to fix it or do what we can for it. It will only get better with time. We're like a fine wine. We'll just take a little bit of time to, not long, not a fine wine that takes way too long. I don't know. Something that ages relatively fast, and then you get to enjoy it. Anyways, thank you for listening. This is I don't know what Tim's.
Like, share, subscribe.
Yeah, I don't know
Talk to
what I
y'all
don't.
again soon.
I have no idea what we're gonna call this podcast. Well, he's gonna call it a podcast. But anyways, night.